I think most of the car journey back from South Wales yesterday had the word slash sound just going around in our heads and probably the heads of Norwich City supporters and players as well after what was an absolutely sickening defeat at Cardiff. 2 late blows. We will, of course, dissect it. Maybe from our perspective, not the only low blow that we've been dealt this week, but we'll jump into that a little bit later. This is, of course, the PinkUn.com and Norwich City podcast. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt and Sam Seaman to pick through the wreckage of what was a very disappointing ending to yesterday's game against Cardiff, where, of course, Norwich City were beaten 2-1, having led up until about the 89th minute or so. Before we get into the game and dissect all the relevant bits, how are we doing, gents? No sort of injuries or muscular concerns, or no one in need of a scan or anything like that? Of course, in the current climate, it's worth checking in on that. So, Paddy, first and foremost, all good on this Sunday morning? No sort of aches or pains, or outside of the norm, of course?
Yeah, outside of the no, we're all good. No, I can't think. No, nothing that requires expert scans and, dare I say it, surgery, which will become apparent if you don't know what I'm talking about as we get into this discussion today. But you never know. I've got to walk home from the office now, so something could fall on my head from a great height. So that's it. Feels where we're at with Norwich at the minute. At any given moment, somebody else pulls something, strains something, injures something, and let's hope that trend doesn't extend to us, thankfully.
Yeah, watch those hamstrings. Sam, same? Is everything good your end? No aches, pains, strains, or anything like that?
No, I'm all right. I'm a little bit tired still after arriving back late last night. But I think if it gets to the point where one of us has to feature on Tuesday night, then I'll probably be fit and raring to go by that point.
There we go. Yeah, it was a long journey back, and I'm sure that the 1,300 Norwich fans who made it as well felt every mile of that journey home after what was a really disappointing end. And of course, we'll jump right into that, but I think we have to start, don't we, Paddy, with a growing injury list. I looked this morning actually, and across the Championship, Norwich have currently 8 players out. Obviously, that includes Kenny McLean, who of course is suspended. So we could maybe say that, look, that's his own doing, that's of his own making. But as a collective, Norwich have 8 players out. Only Burnley have more at this moment in time with 9. So it's that kind of epitomises, I guess, where Norwich are at. But it's not just the number of players, it's the quality of the players, it's the importance of the players. I mean, I've got a number here of those 8 players. I sort of calculated this on the way home last night, but basically since the start of the last season, they've made 308 Championship appearances between them, those 8 players for Norwich City, and that kind of illustrates what Norwich are lacking at the moment. It was the youngest team of the season that Norwich City put out at Cardiff. Obviously included 2 18-year-olds, one 20-year-old in Callum Fisher, Doyle 21. There was only 2 players over 30. It kind of epitomises where Norwich are at the moment. It's a very threadbare looking squad within the first 11, but equally on the bench as well.
Yeah, and you've mapped it out well there. And I think when we start to get into the weeds of judging that performance, particularly the carnage that last 15, 20 minutes, I think we have to have that front and centre of any discussion, because to have that scale of players out, senior frontline starting players with that level of Championship experience, you cannot underestimate the challenge that left the players who were available. And unfortunately, it probably ended up in the conclusion many of us felt it would be by the end. But given the manner of how that game unfolded late on, it does feel like a missed opportunity. But I think, there's no doubt that what was already going to be a difficult situation with who we knew was unavailable, but then became very difficult in light of no Sargent, no Slimani, and just to move that on a slight touch and get a little bit ahead of ourselves. But obviously they go to Sheffield Wednesday now on Tuesday coming, and I've just worked a lineup. Actually, it's on the PinkUn channels now Sunday afternoon. Johannes, very clear. The same personnel who were available yesterday will be the ones that he has to go to again. Marcelino Nunes isn't going to get fast-tracked. He called the idea of that probably stupid because it's far too risky. Gunn won't be back this side of the international break. Ditto McLean through suspension. Ditto Barnes, Liam Gibbs, and Onel. So it really is, unfortunately, bad news in terms of a lot of tired bodies today, I'm sure. and a lot of aches and pains, maybe. But it's going to be those on duty both this Tuesday at Sheffield Wednesday and then Carrow Road next Saturday, Bristol City. So ultimately, it's not going to alleviate any time soon. Certainly not this side of the international break. So very tough hand, as Johannes said after the game yesterday, has been dealt. Probably his biggest challenge yet in terms of on the pitch since he came to the football club, and they're just going to have to somehow or other navigate a path through these next two games. But I think we'll probably find out on Tuesday night. But my fear is that's taken a lot out of them physically, what unfolded at Cardiff, but also maybe mentally, because you could see at the final whistle, it looked like they'd lost a title or knocked out of an FA Cup. At the later stages, it was visibly, the body language was crestfallen. It was all that they'd put into that performance to get nothing, and the manner of how it all sort of went away from him in the final 4 minutes. I think that's a huge challenge to with the same group of players, physically, freshness wise, but also mentally, get them up again for Tuesday night.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's always difficult because when football fans, in a way, they don't want to hear about injuries. That it feels like it's excuse making, and it feels like it's it's putting everything else to the side. But I think, and it's worth noting, Cardiff had injuries as well. Callum Robinson, who made a huge impact for them off the bench, is coming back from an injury. Aaron Ramsey's out, Joe Rules is out. They had several players out as well for balance, but I think it's more contextually where Norwich are at the moment and what it left them with, probably. You go for their team, Jakob Sørensen, who was making his first start since the last day of last season against Birmingham, and obviously last played a game of football. Came on for the very closing bits against Middlesbrough, but before that it was Oxford. So someone who hasn't played a lot of football. Gabe Forsyth, who has only made one championship start this season. Emiliano Marcondes, who wasn't even at the club a month ago. Oscar Schwartau, who's 18, adapting to English football, hasn't had a whole host of starts. Antti Sienats hadn't started a championship game as a striker. There's a lot of context there. The fact that Norwich ended the game with Callum Doyle in midfield, with Amankwa Forson, who I'm sure we're going to get on to in a little while. They had Grant Hanley on the pitch. Who's obviously not played a lot of football and himself has had a major injury to deal with. All of that contextually probably adds up to why this is very difficult. They had obviously Tony Springett and Christian Fashnacht on the bench, who basically had only returned to training in the last few days. Lucian Mahovo was on the bench for the first time. He played for the 21s on Friday. When you wrap all of this in, Sam, it's not. I don't think it's excuse making to highlight this situation, but it is, I think, mitigation, and it is useful context for maybe why we saw what we saw in that closing 15 minutes. And I think Johannes Torup said it, certainly, I don't know if he said it to you, Paddy, but he certainly said it in his interview with Chris Gorham, where because of that, he kind of anticipated that the last 15, 20 minutes, they were going to have to suffer. They were going to have to put bodies on the line, and tired bodies, fatigued bodies, injured bodies who hadn't played a whole lot of football. It is a contributing factor. I think it's very difficult to deny that without maybe going into the realms of it becoming an excuse.
Yeah, and I think there are plenty of problems with that performance, and especially the last 15, 20 minutes that we'll definitely get onto. But ultimately, more than anything, football is about players. And although we'll talk about tactical decisions and substitutions and all of these things that impacted the result ultimately, the main thing is the quality of player that you have on the pitch. And I think we would all agree, as you outlined with sort of the appearance numbers of those players, Norwich have lost several of their very best players, and probably, apart from Borja Sainz, the top 4 or 5 performers this season for them. So it was always going to be really difficult. I think everyone understood that as soon as the team news came out at 2:00, and everyone knew what a big challenge was facing Norwich without Josh Sargent and Anis Ben Slimane. But they will be really frustrated, the fact that they did get it so late and they weren't able to hold on. But yeah, it's an interesting point that Torup raised yesterday in his dissection of the game, in that he almost felt there was this understanding, not only for him, but it seems also among the group, that probably it would be tough late on with some of the players who would have to come on and would be thrown straight in at the deep end. And that's why there was extra frustration that they weren't able to make their dominance count to the tune of probably a 2-goal lead going into that last period. So, yeah, it's interesting how he broke that down. I think that was a fairly honest way of looking at things when you've got players coming in there, and it did look like a very disjointed team. But and I'm sure we'll get onto it. I think there were ways that they maybe could have avoided becoming as defensive as they did. And it did feel like they got a little bit too negative late on and sat back a little bit too much. But when you look at the squad, that was impacted by that as well. There weren't really too many tactical options. And although I understand the criticism, I think the lack of squad depth was really, really exposed when you had a situation where either Callum Doyle was going to have to step into midfield for the first time in his Norwich career, or you had to keep Jakob Sorensen on the pitch for 90 minutes, having, as you said, only played this season against Oxford. So, a really difficult situation for Torup and for those players. Definitely things that they could have improved on and things that they could have done differently to try and get a point or three. But yeah, a lot of mitigation around that one for me.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's you're right. You take the importance out of it and the players out of it, and really, I mean, essentially, Norwich have lost the spine of the team. And I think we saw last season how much it impacted where they want to play. And again, for context, in terms of the way the game panned out, so as we said, Callum Doyle ends up as a defensive midfielder. I've just having a look in front of me. Never in his senior career, at least, as he played in midfield. So that's the type of situation that they're in. Jakob Sorensen, you mentioned him there, and I thought he did well, actually, considering the context and considering it was his first start for a little while and his first sort of real body of work for a significant period. And even that was pushed. Really, they were talking about an hour, and he ended up playing 75 minutes. I don't think it's a coincidence that once he went off, maybe the chaos really began. But, there's a player there that they've had to push beyond the realms of what they wanted to do. And there's several others in that category. And that probably lends us nicely, Paddy, onto those who weren't there. And Josh Sargent. And we know, because we saw last season, the impact that he has. And again, I'll give you some of the numbers around Norwich with and without Josh Sargent, which is pretty stark, really. I will try and find it because I did have it in front of me, and I will try and find it. It's basically 7 games, I think, since the start of last season that they've won without Josh Sargent, which when you consider that he's missed a lot of football, particularly last season, and that these injuries have been difficult, then it puts it, I think, really into context. Here you go. I've got the full numbers now. So they've won 7 of the 21 matches where Josh Sargent has been unavailable, and by contrast, when he has featured, they've lost 7 from 38 in the same period. So if there's anything to dispute or prove, I guess, his importance to the team, and look, everyone who watches Norwich City don't need that evidence really, because you can see it. They're a much better team with him in it. But whenever you're then looking at a prospect of not having him, not just for 1 week or potentially even 2 weeks, or maybe even beyond the international break, we don't know at this period, that again is going to play a major role because of how good he is. I think we're all probably of an agreement that as an all-round number 9, he's the best in the division, and that's alongside obviously Kenny McLean and what he gives them in midfield, Angus Gunn. But just to zoom in on Josh Sargent, it's a big absence, that, isn't it, as it was last season, and probably for him a major blow.
Well, it's two-pronged. It's what he gives, and it's the drop-off to, it's not being uncharitable, but who comes in? Whether it is an Ashley Barnes, as it was last season, under Sarah Adamida while he was still in the building, or on Saturday's evidence, Antti Cernach, who you would expect now will lead the line at Hillsborough as well. And as Johannes said, I put it directly to him, how did he feel Antti had done in that role? Big boots to fill. And again, for me, the tone of what he said was kind of where we're at with that guy. And of course, very early, and we'll say this probably about Forsome when we get to debate him, very early in their Norwich career, very early in their adaptation period to England, on and off the pitch, and all that goes with that. But again, there was some moments of promise, but you need a little bit more now, I think. And certainly without Sargent and leading the line, you need a little bit more. And by that, you mean tangible goal/assist contributions. I mean, there was, again, it was fine margins. It's his cross from that cleverly disguised free kick routine with Marcondes that Shane Duffy just gets his bearings all wrong first half, and he's about 6 yards out, free header. That needs to go on target at the very least. And then there was an excellent, perfectly timed ball for Sainz for that chance that sort of came back off the keeper, and Stacey, then his goal bound effort was cleared off the line by Gutas, I think. So there was moments again, and as Johannes rightly said, just before he came off, he had a real big chance, which he fashioned himself. And for me, that's what, when I look at him, I think, well, you've got that in your locker. We just need to see that now. and we need to see the end product, where he basically took, I think it was a throw-in, turned back infield, powered away from the defender and let fly low left footer from about 18, 20 yards, and Anik's not getting it. It's just outside his post. If it's just inside, he's rooted to his spot. And it might just take that. I mean, we thought maybe going back to Stoke, that might have been the breakthrough moment with that goal. Hasn't quite happened in the intervening short period, but it might need that again just to unlock something. And that's where Johannes is at, I think. He's happy with a lot of what he's seeing from that player, but, and this is the direct parallel with Sargent, he's not offering at the moment, be it in a wider area or yesterday and probably Saturday and Tuesday coming now, down the middle, the actual end product. And that's why Sargent has been so good, so influential for Norwich, end product, but also, as Johannes rightly pointed out, he leads the press. He's so crucial to how they press out of possession at the top end of the pitch. His all-round athleticism. I know we had this discourse earlier in the week when Johannes was, how shall I put it, he was being very diplomatic in, or very, very, trying to disguise the fact that Josh Sargent wasn't going to be available, when he talked about, he'd spoken to him, we need to get him more involved in the game. So by no manner of means is Josh Sargent the complete package yet, certainly under a Torup Norwich. I think there are elements of that general play. If you look at some of the stats about the amount of touches he's had in the last, prior to Saturday's unavailability games, 16, 19, 20, 23, those sort of numbers. You'd want him more involved in general play, but what isn't in dispute is that he remains the talisman in terms of the attacking options. He is the leader of that forward line, and when he's out of the side, at the moment, there isn't an alternative that offers you what he offers you, both in terms of goal threat and in terms of his ability to lead the press from the front. So it's a huge concern. I think the answer probably now lies as it ranges into view the January window. I don't think now it's been proven beyond doubt that Josh Sargent is going to be able to physically lead the line for 46 championship games. That's completely unrealistic. If they don't have the answers inside the building, and of course we hope Barnes is available now for selection the other side of this upcoming international break, but I still think, I remain to be convinced that he's the type of template that Johannes Torup wants from his striker. He's not a prolific goal scorer. His long record would tell you that in the game. So I don't think he's necessarily the answer. If Cernak isn't the answer, then they're going to have to probably look at outside the building in January. And I'm sure they're well aware of that, because it's been graphically illustrated now yesterday. And let's hope not, but maybe in the next 2 or 3 or however long Sargent is unavailable, that sadly, I don't think the answers lie inside the current squad for how you deal with a team without Josh Sargent. So, that isn't helping him in the here and now, but I'm sure the likes of Napper, Adams, Lee Dunn, those characters, Torup, Riddisome, et al., are already thinking about, we're leaving ourselves too short here at the top end of the pitch, and we'll need to address that in the January window, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And I think actually, and you mentioned Cianat, I thought he was a lot better in the second half, actually. And I'm glad you mentioned the opportunity that he fashioned for himself, because I was going to mention that. But on the same token, I thought maybe there was an illustration probably of where he's at, really, in terms of his adaptation to life in England, where there was a moment where I think Sainz slipped him in the first half, and there was an opportunity just to get a shot away, and he couldn't quite get it out of his feet, and he was sort of bundled over, and I think conceded a goal kick in the end. And that was maybe an illustration for where he's at. But even when we talk about him from a fitness perspective, I mean, there's a guy who hasn't played 90 minutes since he came to England and signed for Norwich. And of course, we've spoken about kind of the price tag element to it, which I think is always unfair when a player gets hit with that. But there will be a degree of expectation, I think, around him. And to be honest, between now and till whenever Josh Sargent comes back, it has to work, doesn't it? Because Norwich don't really have any other options beyond maybe us talking about Emiliano Marcondes in some kind of false 9 type of position. But I think that then becomes particularly difficult for Norwich City to fashion, particularly the way that they like to play with their striker remaining high and really pulling the opposition shape long and trying to get as much position as they can. I actually felt maybe he looked a little bit better and was one of the few people who benefited when Norwich made the change to a back 3. Actually, he looked a little bit more comfortable as part of a 2. So yeah, we'll see how that goes on. But in terms of Sargent, Sam, and I think there'll be a lot of Norwich fans concerned about what Torup said. Now, I mean, Paddy referenced kind of his quotes yesterday, and it was Paddy who asked him the question, and I'll read what he said. he said he felt okay straight after Middlesbrough game. So something that happened a little bit overnight or a couple of days, and we could see that a scan was needed. And unfortunately, there's more scans to come, but definitely not available this side of the international break. We don't know how long because there's many ways to go, and we don't know if it requires surgery or rest or whatever. And I think even though Yannis Oftarup isn't specifically saying that it's one that does require surgery and is going to be one that's going to keep him sidelined. I mean, the fact that it's being mentioned, and I felt watching the clip that his body language around it wasn't particularly positive. If I'm honest, it didn't look to me to be a player that he's expecting back in short order in terms of weeks. And look, let's hope it pans out and this scan on Monday goes a lot better than expected. But it's a little bit of deja vu, isn't it, for Josh Sargent and Norwich City, given that he was sidelined with that ankle concern last season that proved so detrimental to Norwich's campaign.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm sure he's getting.
I think we've lost you there, Sam.
We
go. You're back.
I might have disconnected for a second there. Yeah, I think the injury record is probably something that Sargent himself is increasingly aware of now, and probably the club are aware of and concerned about, because not only is it now this concern, which looks like it could be a fairly serious one for the reasons you outlined. There's also last season, as you said, and before that as well, when he came back from the World Cup, there were those ankle issues that not only kept him out for a decent while, but also seemed to affect his performances quite seriously under David Wagner early on in his time under the German as well. So, yeah, I think it's becoming a bit of a problem now that it doesn't feel like, as Paddy said, he can go 46 games in a championship season. And it's probably one of the reasons why maybe he hasn't made that step away from Norwich. And you look at the likes of, Sarah, Rowe, the players who have moved on during his time at the club, having impressed in the championship. Is it maybe a factor for those clubs higher up, the fact that he does seem to have that injury worry? And in terms of the model that Norwich have, wanting to improve those players, create a higher value than what they bought them for, and then sell them for the highest possible price, you think that will be a concern for them? And of course, in the short term, while he is at the club, he's somebody who you're wondering almost, can you afford to build a whole season around him? Because we're already discussing whether not. I've lost it again there. Blimey, I need something with the microphone, but I think I should be back now. But yeah, the fact that Norwich will be thinking about the market, and the fact that we're already having this discussion, shows you the problem that there is around Josh Sargent, and having a striker like that who is so important to the team, but who probably at this point you will have to deal with some absences from at various points. I think that's becoming a concern for Norwich. And in the very short term, as you said, I think everyone will be getting flashbacks from that difficult period last season and how much that impacted them. And I'm sure Torres will have some solutions that he thinks could replace Sargent, and he'll have some ways of getting around him. But I mean, we saw the drop off last season, and you'd suggest, given the fact that Seaman is still getting used to things, I think yesterday was only his second start in a central role for Norwich. The fact that Ashley Barnes, I'd agree with Paddy, doesn't really look like the sort of striker who can be starting centrally in that number 9 position for Torres, and also is coming back from a long-term injury, we have to remember. I mean, there does look like being serious problems there, and I think Norwich fans will be really worried that there's the significance of drop-off that we saw last season. So yeah, a lot of concerns around that. And although you don't want to bring too much doom and gloom, that's the only emotion you can really come out of the situation with from a Norwich City perspective at the moment.
Yes, I was a little bit surprised in the summer actually that they didn't perhaps do another one in that area of the pitch. And you look at it, I know that sort of Gordon was considered the Kamara replacement, and Sianats was kind of we're not talking like for like here, but in terms of numbers and bodies. The one that I feel they didn't really replace was John Rowe, and that sort of player who could obviously play out wide, which is where Sianats has kind of ended up because of how good Sargent is, and obviously with the understanding that because of how good Sargent is and how much he plays, it's very difficult to attract another one to that position. You look at how Adam Eder got stuck in that halfway house really throughout his Norwich City career because he had Teemu Pukki ahead of him. It can be detrimental to have a striker in there. So it's a really difficult one, similarly to maybe like a second choice goalkeeper for all the debate we've had around that. It's a very, very difficult role to get someone to fill, but I was a little bit surprised that maybe there wasn't another one that came in. You look at some of the seasons that Norwich had, for example, you go back to 18-19, they had Teemu Pukki, yes, but look at the impact that Jordan Rhodes played off the bench in those appearances. Right sort of character, right sort of player. His goals were really important. His character was really important to that. The other title winning season, Adam Eder played a really big role in that. They had Jordan Hugill as well, who, okay, he was what he was, and I think he would accept that. But he chipped in with a few important goals. You always, for me, need another, and I think maybe where they're lacking. And look, it's not helped by the fact Barnes is injured, and obviously they felt at the stage in the summer that he was going to be back a lot quicker than he's proven to be back. But I wonder if there's any regret now with hindsight, and of course that's a magic tool, whether or not they would do one. But I agree, this situation probably means that they are, in my view, going to have to do one in January, come what may, really, because I don't think they can afford to leave themselves in this position again. And before we actually, I think it's a pertinent debate actually, because you look at the last 15 minutes, which we're going to come on to in a minute. I felt what they really lacked was somebody who could get the ball up the pitch, who could take a ball in, who could just relieve some of the pressure that they had, because it was relentless and they couldn't basically get themselves out of their final third, really. They didn't have an outlet. It was just kind of long balls over the top that was really left for Sainz to chase, or Kay Gordon to chase when he came on, or Sienats to chase. They didn't have maybe that presence that was able to kind of stick their backside out, take the ball in, win a free kick that could move them up the pitch and just release some of that pressure and give them a breather and halt some of the momentum. And that felt to me like one of maybe the factors, which we'll come on to now, because I think, and we're probably not going to talk about it that much, but I actually think once you take the emotion out of the defeat, and once you maybe even park the final 15 minutes, which I recognise is difficult to do, considering the circumstances that we've mapped out here in the opening 27 minutes of this podcast, the fact that Norwich City, particularly in that first half, but I think even for periods of the second, were as good as they were in terms of dominating the ball, playing in a clear structure with a lot of players who, as we've outlined, either haven't played a lot of football, haven't been frontline options, or have been injured and therefore haven't been exposed to much of what Johannes Hoftorp has wanted to do. The fact they produced the type of performance they did for maybe the opening 75 minutes of that game, I think is incredibly important and incredibly impressive, and probably shows the quality that Torap has as a coach to get that into players as quickly as he did, and to get, I guess, a level of consistency. We can debate, obviously, maybe the toothlessness in the final third, which we have done in kind of that last segment, but in terms of the patterns and the build-up structures and the dominance that they had, and some of the chances they created as well in that first half, and Paddy mapped out a couple that Shane Duffy had, and obviously Sienats had one in the second half. Borja Sainz saw a shot saved as well after a move to a free at the back, which we'll come on to. But I think it's worth highlighting that in the final analysis, because this is a game really that I don't feel that Norwich deserved to lose, but they did lose, and so that probably lends us to delve into that final 15 minutes into more depth, I guess. And Paddy, I guess we've got to start with the change, haven't we? The change that Johannes Hoftorp made on 63 minutes, which was to bring on Emmanuel Forsen and to bring on Grant Hanley to move to. That was later. It was Jack Stacey and Ben Krizene first in the 63rd minute to move Norwich to a free at the back. Which, I know that there's been a lot of talk about it from fans, and I recognise that, but I actually felt for the first maybe 10 minutes of that change, it had its desired effect. And you look at some of the Sienats chance was created in that period, the Borja Sainz chance, which he should have taken after exchanging passes from Antti Sienats. Again, that was about a 20-pass move that they created, and it was designed, or I felt it was designed to try and make the pitch bigger, in a sense, to try and pull Cardiff out of that sort of 4-4-2 that they were in, which I didn't think was that successful for them anyway, really, and just to maybe inject some energy and to get Norwich up the pitch through those wide areas. But clearly, and this is the element that I felt did impact it, Cardiff then changed. They then went to a free at the back. It allowed Callum O'Dowda to push forward, Callum Robinson to push forward. It really pushed Krizene and Stacey really into that back five, which is always a possible outcome of moving to a free at the back. Norwich drop deeper and deeper and deeper. They then make the double change that we spoke about. So what for you was the issue? Was it the change of formation? Was it the time at which that change was made? what do you pinpoint that fairly chaotic final 15 minutes onto, and how much does Johannes Torup and his coaching team need to take it on their shoulders?
Well, I mean, as I sort of teed it up at the start, Connor, I mean, any debate around how that final 15 panned out has to take on board that, you know, Woody in an ideal world, you've got Kenny McLean and Josh Sargent and Angus Gunn, but even with the players available yesterday, would he want to take Sorensen off in that scenario? Of course not. And you underlined earlier on that there was a calmness and a composure when it was him and Forsyth and Marcondes, which underscored that. I mean, I don't know. I didn't look at 75 minutes, but I know at half time it was about 65, 68% possession in Norwich's favour. I'd imagine it was still that round about that point. I think it ended up about 56%, but obviously that was because it was heavily skewered at the end by almost total domination from Cardiff of the ball and territory. So all of that, I'm not even going to get into excuses or mitigation. That they are facts of the matter. You know, if they'd not had to deal with a scenario where you've got Callum Dore pushed into an unaccustomed midfield role, you're throwing on Forson, you're throwing on Grant Hanley to bolster a back line. All of those elements were almost out of his control. But I guess your leading question there was, you know, was it tactically something that they could have done differently and then produced a different outcome? Well, yes. I think there were the two waves, and you rightly, because Omar Rizza pointed out, they matched Norwich up in terms of that three, because he wanted, as he outlined it, he wanted O'Dowda, who was the destroyer in chief. It was his assist for the first equaliser, and then it was his goal. But he wanted him, and he wanted Tanner on the other side, higher, wider, and pinning Norwich back. And that sadly held sway in terms of the tactical back and forth between the respective coaches. So yes, I suppose you could argue that could Norwich have responded, but then it goes back to the point I've just made. How do they respond then? You know, what personnel could have possibly been introduced, or constellation of players on the pitch to maybe offset that? So for me, I mean, really, and it's not to dig him out, but Amankwa Forson deals with O'Dowda, doesn't allow him to skip past him and go down the left-hand side in the move that led to Robinson with a deflected shot that wrong-footed long, it's worth pointing out. And then he clears his lines in the box for the winner. Two errors from Amankwa Forson. Norwich probably hold on, at the very least, a point, if not three. And this debate isn't happening. We're not talking about the tactical errors that Torup and his coaching staff did in terms of their approach and the setup, and maybe retreating and vacating too much of the pitch, and almost, as I've seen it pointed out this morning, very Wagner-esque in the approach to sort of clinging on to what they had, preservation mode. And as often happened with a Wagner sort of setup, it eventually doesn't work for you. And then where do you go there? And in Norwich's case yesterday, it was too late to do really anything about it once that Dowda strike had gone in. So, yeah, for me, I think it would be remiss to go down a rabbit hole that is dissecting Johannes Torup's errors in terms of his tactical setup for all the reasons already stated. I think it's individual errors and just a set of circumstances which meant they were, you know, having to effectively kind of plug holes and cling on for dear life. But you know, it will be interesting if that scenario plays out again, be it, you know, in the shorter term or longer down the track, whether he would go quite so readily into that shape and look to do that, or whether he would maybe tactically try and do something different. But I think if this was, you know, a debate that was sort of tilted towards digging him or his coaching staff out for errors they've made, I think that's probably wider the mark on this scenario.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually, and for the reasons that I've mentioned, because I think if you're going to talk about the final 15 minutes, then you have to talk about the first 75 minutes, which, considering the cards they were dealt, as I mentioned earlier, I still think Norwich looked pretty good, all told, throughout the piece. And actually, you know, I've got a shot map in front of me now at the moment in terms of Cardiff, and actually, if you close that game off at 89 minutes, and this is maybe an easy point to make, and I recognise that, but let's say the game finishes at 89 minutes, Norwich have won 1-0, and actually you look at the shots that they limited Cardiff to in that second half. Colwell had one on the 81st minute. Turnbull had one in the 85th, which was obviously that one that came through a sea of bodies that George Long claimed pretty comfortably. There was a free kick, I think, in about the 50th minute, and there was another Turnbull shot from potentially another free kick in the 57th. That was all Cardiff had in that second half period. For all of the dominance, for all of the territory, for all of the invited pressure that they gave, there wasn't a huge amount of saves that George Long was making, or the saves that he were making were not of a high quality. So you could say, actually, up until maybe the final moments, and that obviously lends us on to the next bit of our debate, Norwich actually defended pretty well and defended their goal pretty well, and that was the case probably throughout the whole encounter. So I do think maybe there is an element of outcome that is shaping this debate, and look, that's always the case in terms of the way that these things work. But I think Paddy's right, isn't he, Sam? And nobody wants to we've had this debate probably with George Long over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's never easy or nice to highlight a player, particularly when they're struggling. I think as obviously as Amankwah Forson is at this moment in time in terms of what he's doing on the pitch. But it's difficult to look at both goals, and I think when you watch them back, it's difficult to look at them as anything other than really poor moments for him. I mean, the ease at which Callum O'Dowda skips past him. I mean, he might not even be there to be brutal. He makes no impact to Callum O'Dowda at all, either physically, positionally, tactically, nothing. He might as well be invisible in that moment. And then the decision in the 93rd minute, when you've got your ball in the box and you're trying to, I mean, I'm really struggling to comprehend really what he was trying to do, to then choose to dribble it out of his own box, lose possession. To be fair, which again I think may get lost in the final analysis of it, and probably this conversation here, he does then make the block from the shot. But of course, the block then falls to Callum O'Dowda, who lashes it in, and the whole thing doesn't happen if he decides to clear his lines rather than to dribble out of his own box. So for as much as maybe the conversation in some directions has been taken towards, it was the change to the three at the back, it was the decision to bring this player on, he's got to do better in both of those moments, hasn't he? And that is ultimately what has cost Norwich at least a point here, but probably all three.
Yeah, there were poor moments, and obviously there were more than just Amankwah Forson involved in those goals, and there were other players who probably made mistakes in the lead up. But yeah, I think it's hard to look beyond him, and as tough as it is for an individual probably to be singled out, ultimately that's what football is. And for all the talk of tactics and whoever controlled the ball and made the most chances, so much of it, even at the highest level, it comes down to mistakes and individual moments and decisions. And it's hard to think that. Well, I think the first goal, to be honest, for me is the harder one to accept, because that's nothing really to do with confidence. That's just standing in front of your man and trying a bit harder, really, to stop him doing what he eventually did. But the second one, I think, probably is born a little bit of his recent form, because I think it would be natural for him now to, every time he gets the ball, be really nervous and be thinking about what could go wrong rather than what could go right in that scenario. And although it does feel like a pretty crazy decision to try to dribble out of his own box, and I think we have to also highlight that, if we're going to criticise for going back to the Wagner model, then we have to also look at that as a symptom of a system that wants to play out from the back and wants to do things a certain way rather than just hoofing the ball forward and losing it in that territory. But every time he gets the ball now, he must be getting flashbacks of the mistakes he's made previously, thinking about how many times he's lost the ball in recent weeks. And it feels like the confidence is playing such a huge part in all of his performances. And it's difficult actually to see where he personally comes out of this rut, really, because you look at a striker, for example, who's struggling with confidence, let's say Ante Sienats, and you can say, okay, well, he'll be in the box when the ball goes into the box. Maybe it will bounce off a defender, it will come off his shin, and it will roll over the line, and he gets a goal, and that transforms his confidence and changes his Norwich career. But for a midfielder, especially one in Forson's mould, who doesn't really feel like he's maybe a Sarah type who's going to be scoring fantastic goals or getting in too many of those advanced positions. His performances are going to be judged on how much he keeps the ball, on finding good passes, on beating players, on offering a bit more defensive resistance than he did late on at Cardiff. And when you're judged on those sustained performances rather than just moments, it's hard for luck really to do it for you. So he has to find a way of trying to let the ability that we saw early on after his signing come through once again. But it's really difficult to see how that's going to happen at the current moment. And as we spoke about with Sianak, it is still very early on in his Norwich career. Of course, he's never played in England before. And we talked about plenty of mitigation when he came and why maybe there shouldn't be huge expectation, even if people could see the talent. And I actually think from his perspective, it's almost reflective of what it's looked like for the team, because you feel like if things had started really poorly this season, then everyone would have said, that's what we expected. Bit of patience is fine. But because he set those expectations pretty early on and he set quite a high bar, then Norwich fans are scratching their head wondering where on earth did that player go. And I think that's part of the problem for him. So it's turned into quite a vicious cycle for him personally, and I think that's where that second goal comes from. And for him, and probably chiefly for Johannes Torp, because he's going to need a helping hand at the moment. It's about finding the way to produce those performances, because we saw early on that he's a talented player. You know, you don't get a player from RB Salzburg, and they don't sign players if they don't see a talent there. So I wouldn't completely write him off in a Norwich shirt yet. It is still early, as we've said time and again. But hard not to criticise him for those two moments when Cardiff scored late on.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's good context. This is still a player who's 21, like you say. He's only just come to England. He's an international. He's played Champions League football. He's won Austrian league titles. So there's clearly talent there, I think, and we mentioned that. But we're now maybe beginning to see the aspects of perhaps what you said when he first joined, Paddy, about why Salzburg let him go and the physicality issues and the growth and work that he still needs to do. And look, he's not alone in that. You think about some of the early performances that, not comparing them by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of where they are at their respective periods, like someone like Mario Vrancic, who had a very difficult start to life in England. Marco Stiepermann as well. I think he took a year before anyone even knew what he really was as a footballer. Although maybe we could open that debate now, because I think he's still quite difficult to define. But there is kind of evidence that players over periods, they grow and they get better. And I think, to be fair to him, and this maybe links, I think, to the first part of our conversation, I think if everyone is fit, that is not the type of game, the type of environment, the type of game state that Emmanuel Forson is getting dropped into. Dare I say, I think it's probably one that in an ideal world would have probably suited someone like Liam Gibbs a lot better if he was fully fit and available, because of the energy that he brings, because of maybe some of the defensive aspects that he brings. I think what Emmanuel Forson almost needs at the moment is to be dropped into games like Norwich beating Hull 4-0, where their confidence is flowing in the team and he's able to maybe pick the ball up in better areas of the pitch and higher areas of the pitch where them concessions aren't quite as costly as they're proving at the moment. But he's in a real rut, isn't he, Paddy? And I guess when you see it with players, it's difficult, because the only way that he can get out of it, I think, is through playing. And again, that's difficult for Norwich, because I think as we mapped out there, the environment feels like it needs to be slightly different for him to play. But ultimately, Norwich are going to need him. And I think probably it ultimately points out that you look at where he is in terms of Torup's mind at the moment. Well, Gabe Forsyth started ahead of him, and that's a credit to Gabe Forsyth, who I thought was very good, actually, in particularly for that first half period. Sorensen's ahead of him at this moment in time, and that's probably indicative as well of maybe what they're seeing in training. So it's a rut that he needs to get himself out of. But equally, we've seen at the start of the season that there's talent in there. So as Sam says, this is not by any stretch of the imagination, shouldn't be 13 games into, I think he's only played 10 times for Norwich, a complete write-off of what he's about. But equally, there's recognition that where he's at the moment, he's struggling. And I think you don't need to have a UEFA Pro license to see that at this moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, any assessment of him as a Norwich asset is, well, ridiculous at this stage to be trying to benchmark him this early on in his career. I wouldn't even consider assessing what he is and what value he can bring to this football team for next season at the earliest. Because of those case studies you've referenced, I mean, I bring it even more up to date. I mean, Nunes first season glimpses, if you remember at the start, not identical, but he was. I mean, there was that free kick at Hull. I remember very early on in his first season, and you thought, what a player they've got here. And then he tapered off a degree, and then he's come back really strong and to the point where he was almost indispensable, I think, in a tore-up setup prior to his recent injury. I mean, you've listed a few midfielders. I mean, I would throw in Nunes, I'd throw in McLean in terms of where Forson is now. He's right at the bottom of the pile for me in terms of options if all were fit and available. Schwartau, we've not mentioned him, another one of the summer intake. He's further along, I think. I'm struggling really at this stage, and it's probably because we haven't seen enough of him. What type of midfielder is he? It's a bit of a puzzle. You know, it doesn't look like he's got the physicality to be a holder, a deeper liar, and get about the pitch and put fires out. You know, referenced to you yesterday after the game, Connor. You know, in physique, he's not dissimilar to an Ollie Skip, but you could see what Ollie Skip was, and you could see in those areas alongside McLean in that season, he just came alive, and that was his game. He was so athletic and so brilliant at closing things down, and as I say, putting fires out before they even started to rage. So, and I don't really necessarily see that he's got maybe the creativity on the small sample we've seen that he can play as a 10 or maybe in a more progressive place. He clearly struggled when he was pushed out slightly wider yesterday to deal with O'Dowda going back towards his own goal. So I'm not sure what he is at the minute. And that's probably not going to help anybody who wants to assess him and his value to this team right here, right now. They've obviously identified a player there of some potential, but he very much remains potential. And because of the situation they're in, because ultimately this is about trying to position Norwich into a playoff / promotion chasing contender, you can't really afford to take too many risks with him by starting games. So he gets that adaptation period. So it's a very difficult conundrum that he faces. And that's, unfortunately, I think where when everybody does start to come back in those midfield areas, he's going to find himself out of the picture again. And maybe it's too early to start talking about loan spells, maybe not so much January, but certainly if this pattern was to continue and he doesn't get a lot of game time this season, you probably are having to look at getting him some game time somewhere else. Because it's not going to alter, I don't think. And we've not even really discussed Liam Gibbs. He will be in the equation as well in very short order. So it's a shame because, in a admittedly a diabolical opening day performance at Oxford collectively, he was a shining light. I mean, he came in there and he just looked like many levels above. You know, his close control, his energy, the dynamism he brought in tight spaces, albeit in a very, very anemic overall performance from Norwich. So I think maybe we have to sort of reflect that it was more that Norwich was so bad collectively that day rather than that he was that good. Stevenage was the only other game I thought he really offered something that you thought, this guy could be ready for a decent exposure to the starting lineup. But thereafter, I mean, we haven't talked about Crystal Palace. That was, that dislocated shoulder episode that might have set him back. Knocked his confidence a little bit, and maybe we need to give him some more, slack in terms of that episode. But there's no doubt in the limited opportunities he's had since, culminating with Cardiff, he really hasn't grasped his opportunities. And as I say, I think for me now, the die is probably cast in the next 6 months or so. He is going to be at the very best a bit part player, and he might not even be that, unfortunately, because there is quite a logjam of midfielders ahead of him. So let's just dial down any sort of rush to judge what he is or his effectiveness or whether he's going to be a decent player for Norwich. I think he just needs to use this season as one to understand about England, about the Championship, and about his role in a tore-up Norwich midfield. And then hopefully, he can use all that experience to come back strong next season. Because, as you rightly said, you look at his career and there must be something about him to have played in the Champions League, to now represented Ghana at senior level, to have played at a decent level in Austria. So there's clearly potential, but in the here and now, no, he's far away from the Norwich first team starter when everybody's fit and available. And in that, he isn't alone. There's a lot of projects when you look down this group of players, because that's ultimately what Torop, Napa, et al. Want to try and do, which is cultivate players. But doing that, it's not an exact science. Some will step forward, and Forsyth seems to have done that from this crop of young players. Others will take longer and maybe take a more circuitous route to the first team. You just hope that in time he proves that he was an astute piece of recruitment.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them as well will, and I think project's an apt word, but a lot of them are going to go from sort of up high and produce really good performances to then dropping, and obviously it's going to be that lack of consistency that I think we associate with young players, and that is ultimately going to be part of the process. I think you're right. I think in an ideal world now with a Mankell Force, and if everyone was fit and they had all the midfield options, I think I'd almost be inclined to say, look, take a month, go and spend it with a sports scientist. I don't want to see you go and get yourself in the right shape. Try and, because you look at someone like Nunez, and I think key to even someone like Josh Sargent, really. Someone shared some footage the other day of a goal that Norwich scored in the Premier League, and you look at his physique then compared to what it is now. Nunez as well, I think, is someone who's got broader shoulders, who looks physically a lot better, and that has really helped his sort of adjustment to Championship football. I'd almost be inclined to do that, but obviously they're not in a position to do that at the moment. So yeah, he's an interesting one, and it's going to be interesting to see how he develops in the role that maybe he does take. But there's definitely talent in there, but yeah, he's struggling at the moment. Before we look ahead to Sheffield Wednesday in the week, we've got to have our usual Borja Sainz segment, I think, which is another stunning strike. I mean, it's almost predictable now, isn't it? He needs to score a volley or do something a little bit more unpredictable. But in all seriousness, this strike, and we spoke in depth about the two that he got, only one this week. Come on, Borja. The two that he got last week, but this one's good because I think there is a touch, but I don't think it's a touch to create space. I think it's almost a touch because he's not quite set himself and the ball's a bit stuck under his feet. But you look at his body shape, his head sort of above his knee. So to get the height, the loft, the pace, the accuracy on that strike to put it where he puts it is magical, which I think probably lends us to this question really, which is for either of you to take on and answer if you want. But at the moment, I'm struggling to think, certainly in my time watching Norwich City, of a more consistent player or somebody who perhaps has hit those shots from outside the box as consistently well, as consistently accurately as what he's doing at this moment in time. Because it's not just the way he's doing it, it's the manner that he's doing it. We're not talking about a player who's taking 10 shots from outside the area and every one in 20 flies into the top corner. This is an astounding accuracy that he's achieving and consistency. I'm struggling, and I'm boiling it down simply to this aspect rather than I think opening up any, is he the new Emi Buendia debate, which I think is pretty silly if I'm honest. But in terms of this aspect, I'm really struggling to think of anyone better from outside the area in those positions than Borja Sainz. So that's an open question for any of you guys to jump on, really.
I think it's hard to think of any player of any description, let alone Norwich City, who can score goals of that type. So
the only one, sorry to jump in, but the only one that I sort of thought about was James Maddison. But I think we're talking about him more from dead ball situations rather than.
I was going to throw him in. Yeah, I was just waiting my turn politely, but I was going to throw him with Maddison, Coventry's finest. Yeah, but not the weight of goals, no, but clearly as a ball striker outside the box. Yeah, he top quality, isn't he?
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to consistency, doesn't it? As you said, those numbers. Maddison wasn't producing the numbers with the sort of regularity that Sainz has at the start of this season, but the fact that he's gone on to obviously play at the highest level suggests that it is quite difficult to do that on a regular basis. So if Sainz can continue this, then obviously, well, it's going to be unbelievable numbers by Championship standards. But yeah, it's definitely giving them something completely different. And where we were looking for sources of goals after Norwich lost Rowan Sarah in the summer, all of a sudden, Borja Sainz has decided he's going to score every time he shoots from within 25 yards. So yeah, that's been really, really helpful. And now it's about consistency, because you'd say, even consistency of goals from 10 yards is quite hard for players to produce, let alone when he's scoring goals like this. on such a regular basis. So Norwich will hope it doesn't drop off, but based on what we've seen so far at the start of the season, it's hard to really find any evidence to suggest that it will.
Yeah, agreed. I'm just having a look now whilst you're speaking in terms of, because it always feels like when we have these debates, particularly around players in his position. And again, I don't think that we need to go into a quality debate because I think that's pretty pointless at this moment in time. But in terms of output, I think it's really interesting to look at where Sainz is at the moment compared to, say, Maddison, who we just mentioned, who in his best Norwich City season scored 14 goals. And that was obviously in that final one that earned him the move to Leicester. There were 8 assists in there. So I'm going to be picky with Borja Sainz and say that I think he needs to up the creative aspects of what he's doing. But Sainz is already on 11. And you know, Maddison got he got 14. Buendia in obviously that stupid season in 2021. And again, this is where I think the debate is pretty futile, because I think they're different type of players. There were 16 assists to this, but in terms of pure goals, Buendia only got 15. So Sainz is on 11 in November. I mean, the levels that he could get to in terms of his goal scoring, Paddy, is pretty frightening. But again, and I reiterate this, I still think that if he wants to be certainly of the standard that those two have got in terms of the money moves that he's got and the caliber of clubs that they went to, I still think we need to see a little bit more from him creatively.
Oh yeah, without shadow, but also defensively, and that was the point Torrent made when he was asked midweek to almost rank where he is in terms of the players he's coached. He said he's right up there in terms of offensive, but to paraphrase what he said, to get to that next level, he needs to be better defensively. And it's not even showing a lack of willingness to get back and support either your fullback or the midfield shape. It's knowing when to do it, and that experience and learning about that game management element of his craft. But I mean, the age he is, of course, he's not going to be the finished article. But you know, if we're already now talking about to get to the next level, all he needs to add is maybe that sort of defensive discipline. Then it just tells you how far advanced he is in terms of, because ultimately he'll be judged by what he does contribute in terms of goals and assists, given where he plays on the pitch. I mean, for me, it's also you know, it's a testament to Torrop, because how often have we heard Torrop say, when asked to grade where he's at with this group and his philosophy and his strategy, the reference point he normally throws back at us is creating the same type of chances game after game after game. That tells you that the shape of the team, how they're progressing the ball, the players' understanding of the positions and their roles can be filtered down to, are they creating similar type of chances? Well, I mean, I don't know how many of those 11 goals that have been him unleashing that right foot hammer from 20, 25-yard range into the top bin. But that tells me that the areas of the pitch that he's getting the ball to get shots away, very similar. So it's also a testament to Torrop and his ability in a relatively short period of time to embed that template, which, you know, at the moment, Sainz is clearly the biggest beneficiary of.
Yeah, free shots from or free goals, sorry, from outside of the penalty box from 10. So he's had 10 shots outside the box. 3 of those have gone into the back of the net. It's remarkable what he's doing at this moment in time, and yeah, it's long may it continue. I fear that at some point it's going to stop, but he keeps doing it. So yeah, long may it continue in that sense. Obviously, Norwich heading to Sheffield Wednesday on Tuesday. It's Wednesday on Tuesday to add to the confusion, and I think we've already mapped out why that's going to be very difficult. And before I get the boys to produce what their favourite thing to do, which is points and points predictions from the next 2 games leading into the November break, I did want to highlight something I mentioned at the start about, you know, last weekend or this weekend, that Callum O'Dowda goal being the second, I think, slap in the face that we've had this week, and that is because this is the first for me, which is the fact, I don't know if you boys saw this or not, but did you see the award for the sexiest podcast hosts was handed out this week? I'm sure maybe we were on some kind of shortlist, but we've missed out on the awards. And you know, I don't usually like
who won. Not that I'm interested in the slightest, but who won anyway?
This is what I'm going to come on to, because I don't usually like to moan about our listeners. And you know, we're obviously very grateful that they join us on both YouTube and audio. But the fact that these guys, who I think, and my knowledge is not the best, so is it the Kelsey brothers, who I think one of them is an American footballer and goes out with Taylor Swift. So I think they might have been heavily helped by her, what they called Swifties, aren't they? Which I know, Paddy, you're a part of. So I'm disappointed that we've not ranked a little bit higher to challenge those guys. But there's always next year, particularly with your sunglasses, Paddy. I thought we'd have been right up there.
What on earth are you? Where's this segment come from? I did wonder when you said earlier on there's been some disappointment. I've been racking my brains what it was, and now I know.
I've been holding. Yeah.
Is there not? Well, if there's a Norfolk subset, then it goes without saying. There's only one winner, isn't there? But I don't think we can compete with Taylor Swift's. Is she still? Are they still together? You can see how big a Swiftie I am. I don't have a clue. No, they're not. No, you don't.
No, I think they are. I think they are, but I don't pay that close attention to it. But that was a disappointing revelation for me.
Was it vote? Why I'm even? I'm interested to ask the question. But was it voted for by? Was it one of those like fan-led votes? Was it?
I think it was. Yeah, without looking into it, I think it's disappointing.
Well, we're not going to really stand to as big an audience as the PinkUn is. I don't think it pales in comparison with.
I'm not having it. Must try harder next year, and that's for you guys rather than us. I think because we'll keep turning up. Anyway, let's.
You meant me and Paddy rather than you. I thought that was what you were saying when you said you guys. But now, Paddy, this is why you need to be more active on X. It's because I've known this is a bone Connor's had to pick for a while now. He's had a little moan about that a few days ago as well. So clearly it's something that's stuck with you for a while, mate.
I think we've been robbed, absolutely robbed. If I'm honest, it's a travesty that we haven't been able to at least challenge for that award. But hey, maybe we were on a shortlist somewhere at the right at the very bottom on maybe page 8 or something. But anyway, let's, much like Norwich City, this final segment's gone to a bit of a shambles. Let's close it off. Points predictions for the next 2 games, and obviously we've mapped out the circumstances. Sheffield Wednesday away, Bristol City at home to lend us into the November international break. And can I shock you? I'm quite looking forward to that now with the bodies that Norwich have unavailable. Mr. Davitt, let's come to you first. 6 on the table. How many are Norwich City going to be in receipt of this time next week?
I'm going to go positive 4.
Oh, nice. What's the breakdown?
Well, as to be expected, I think they'll get a draw at Hillsborough, and then Carrow Road, the loving arms of all those fans will bring them back to home and get them over the line. So I think they'll beat Bristol. So 4 from 6, which...
Good return, that. I'll take that.
Yeah, given everything we've discussed. Yeah, given everything we've discussed in this preceding hour, I think you'd probably say, yeah, fair enough. 4 points from 6 for me.
Sam?
Yeah, given all the problems we've talked about so far, I thought I was feeling fairly optimistic, but I'm going to go with 3, which I thought was going to be probably the highest. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure that it will happen against Bristol City and not Sheffield Wednesday. But I've just got a feeling that Norwich won't lose both of those games, and I think the draws have to end at some point. So yeah, I thought I was being optimistic, but it turns out 3 points maybe isn't as positive as you could be at the moment.
Yeah, I'm hovering between 3 and 4, but I think I'm maybe going to fall on your side, Sam, and go 3. I think Tuesday is going to be so difficult, and contextually as well. Sheffield Wednesday, was it 6-2 that ended in the end against Watford? So there's going to be some sort of reaction that Norwich are going to have to face as well there. So throw that into the mix, and I think it makes a difficult trip all the more difficult. And of course, that seems like an apt place to leave it. So thank you, gents. Thank you. Well, I don't know if I want to say thank you actually to the listeners for not voting for us as in the Sexiest podcast host. But hey, there's work to do for them next year, and there's work for Norwich City to do this week leading into the international break. We will of course join you after that Bristol City game next weekend to dissect it all. We will see you then. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.